Welcome to the Grange podcast, where we strive to rekindle the spirit of community and belonging. Our mission is simple, yet profound: to foster transparent communication and share valuable information that brings us closer together. Join us as we explore stories, insights, and conversations with the intent of building a stronger, more connected community, one episode at a time. Today, my guest is Gabriel Cruden. Gabriel is a husband, father, and entrepreneur based in Kettle Falls, Washington. Gabriel has spent most of his adult life working in different aspects of journalism and recently purchased the Statesman Examiner. He also runs and publishes The Sun, the Deer Park Tribune, the Huckelberry Press, and the North Columbia Monthly. Aside from working as a full-time owner-operator, Gabriel is also heavily involved in our local communities, in particular, serving as an advisor to many nonprofit organizations. During our conversation, we touched on Gabriel's early life and upbringing, his journey to college, and his return to Stevens County, which eventually led to him purchasing the newspaper he used to work for as a teenager. Gabriel is a kind, insightful, well-intentioned person with a strong passion for building our local community. I really enjoyed getting to know him and look forward to having him back on the podcast soon. This was my first podcast that I've recorded where I had technical difficulties. And about the 10.5-minute mark, my soundboard stopped recording. We had to pause our conversation and I had to reboot the system. And I think we lost anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes of our conversation. So I note that in the recording, but it's not going to flow well. So somewhere in that 10 to 11 minute mark, we're going to go from one conversation essentially to another. And unfortunately, we do lose about 10 or 15 minutes of Gabriel explaining some of his earlier childhood experiences. I'm still working out the kinks to this deal. Definitely apologize to the listeners and to Gabriel for that. And I'm trying to get the bugs worked out and figured out what happened there. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. We still recorded the majority of the conversation, just a little bit clunky there in the beginning. So we will move forward. If you find value in our conversation, please help spread the word by sharing this podcast with a friend. Don't forget to click on the subscribe button to be notified when a new episode is released. Anyone interested in coming on the podcast can reach out to thegrangepodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for tuning in. Now, here's my conversation with Gabriel Cruden. As we step into 2025, and the advice givers share their wisdom and encouragements to people setting resolutions for the new year, I have noticed some themes emerge. Small steps lead to big results. Constancy is the key, even if it just means simply showing up. And good nutrition, moving your body, and getting plenty of sleep all are fundamentally supportive. In my reflection on these topics, writing this column, I made some tea and was rather delighted to notice the quote on the tea bag string, attributed to Ralph Waldo Emerson: "The creation of 1,000 forests is one acorn." Applying that intention and attention toward an envisioned future, whether it is a New Year's resolution or reviving a region's community newspaper, seems to require the same stuff. Small steps leading to big results, consistently showing up and taking care of one's health along the way. And that was written by the publisher of the North Columbia Monthly, the Statesman Examiner, the Deer Park Tribune, and I think a couple other ones, Gabriel Cruden. And joining us here today on the Grange is Gabriel. So welcome to the Grange.
Thanks. Very glad to be here.
I read that when I always pick these up at Crandall's. I love going to Crandall's for coffee. And I obviously cut some of the body out that you'd written here just to not get too long-winded. But I really loved, and we were actually just talking about this offline, the idea of small, like consistent steps. I think I use the phrase 1% better. Um, the creation of 1,000 forests is one acorn, you know? And so I guess I felt some alignment when I was reading those words. I felt some encouragement, you know, of, and I don't know you all that well, but I understand that you've taken on a big endeavor of recently purchasing our local newspaper, the Statesman Examiner. And what I appreciated about your words in this were that you acknowledged the task at hand and accepted it. And then with the right mindset of consistency is key, just show up. I kind of got the feel that's how you were going to tackle your new endeavor. So I appreciate those words. I appreciate reading this each month. I think it's a really cool way to connect with parts of the community that I usually don't rub shoulders with. I love the Statesman. Because as a child, my dad would read it. And so I started reading it like probably legitimately in the 4th grade. And I even, when I was in college, I had a subscription. And so it sent it to me. So wherever I've been, I've always read the Statesman. And not to talk poorly on anyone, but it got to the point where I wasn't reading it anymore. And I can tell you that the last year has been good. Good. And I think even just from a, what am I trying to say? Like an aesthetic point of view, the last one was my favorite. I just thought the pictures were great. The headlines were awesome. It's great to see colored print, the format, like it was just really enjoyable to read. And I looked forward to it. Like I sat down, blocked out 20 minutes and it was awesome. So, I just wanted to start with that. I appreciate you being here. I look forward to getting to know you better. But if you wouldn't mind, if we could first start maybe just with a little bit of early life childhood, give us the 10,000 foot view, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for that introduction.
Yeah.
That was fantastic. And I'm very glad to be here and impressed with, what you've set out to do with this project. And I admire you and congratulate you on doing that.
Thank you.
So as far as my childhood goes, I was born in Connecticut.
Really?
My dad's side of the family was East Coast Sicilian. At a very young age, my parents moved to northern Michigan and started a homestead there.
The UP?
Southern Peninsula, but up by Traverse City area.
Okay.
East Jordan. And so in that winter, they had built a sort of a small 3-story apartment, goat barn, chickens, that sort of thing, with a hayloft storage. And then we're starting on the house, and a chimney fire burned the whole thing.
Oh, no.
And it was around that time that my parents ended up splitting up. And so it was my mom and I living in a school bus in northern Michigan, no heat. And luckily, her mom was also building on the property there. And so despite having lost everything, there were a few things that were treasured items, like my mom's guitar that she'd had since she was a kid and that sort of thing that survived.
How old are you?
I was in, it was before my memory, so I'm thinking around 3.
Okay.
Something like that, yeah.
And how old were you when they split?
Around that
right,
time.
that's the same time.
Yeah, so I have no memory of them together. So,
Only child?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So my dad did remarry, and I have 2 step siblings and a half brother, and I'm the oldest of that lineup. So I would go and, fast forwarding a little bit, I would go and visit them in the summers and every other Christmas, that kind of thing.
So you kept in touch with both parents were part of your life.
Yeah. It was pretty much my mom and I for the first handful of years. And then as I got older, I started to reconnect with my dad. So
do you have recollection of living in the bus?
Not really. It's one of those things where I've heard stories about it.
Yeah.
And they've become my memories, but I don't feel like those are my actual memories. It's more of the stories.
Is it safe to say that your mom's resilient?
She was, yeah.
Yeah.
In northern Michigan, winter is nothing to sneeze at. I mean,
Yeah.
and particularly some winters, like as we had a bunch of family and friends help with the house, and it was partially finished, and we lived in that the next year. And there was so much snow. It was a sort of like a daylight basement style type of house on a slope, and that first floor got completely buried in snow. Like it was so deep that we had to dig a tunnel out to the woodshed, and you could go out the second story window,
Wow.
to go out into the snow. Remember, like it would just snow and snow, and so you'd put like a shovel on top of the car in the snow so you could find where the car was to start digging.
That's no joke.
Yeah, I mean, it was a serious amount of snow.
Wow. And so how long did you live there?
Until I was about 10 years old. So in my best friends were Celeste and Solomon, and they lived, they had grown up with me on the neighboring property there. And their parents and my parents had basically moved up there together.
Okay.
So, and fast forwarding just a couple of weeks ago, I actually went to a memorial in Michigan, visited my dad for his birthday as a surprise, but also reconnected with Celeste and Solomon, who I haven't seen in more than 40 years.
How cool is that?
Yeah, it was really cool. So it was their dad that had passed away, which, of course was a sad thing, but it was good to go back and visit the old places where I'd lived. And
Had you been in contact with them via phone or social media or anything?
Not really.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Did you guys like leave off? I mean, was there still that common friendship, or
it was like meeting them anew?
Yeah,
but also having those childhood memories that we shared.
Yeah.
So it was like an immediate closeness and yet a new person. So,
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
so
cool.
It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I lived in Michigan until about moved out west in fourth grade to Central Oregon, where my grandpa lived and had built a place outside of Bend along the Deschutes River. And I loved fourth grade because I got to be right next to my grandpa. I had an awesome teacher at school. I had friends down the street, and I had both hot running water and electricity in the same place, which up until that point I hadn't really experienced. And I had carpet and my own bedroom with a closet. So it was like these basic things.
Nice amenities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and to this day, I don't take hot running water for granted. Every day when I take a hot shower, I'm like, this is wonderful.
I bet.
So grateful for hot water. I can get by without electricity, but the hot water is I really appreciate that.
Especially in the winter.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So we lived there for a year. I had a stepdad by that point who was a boat builder, and Robin McMillan. And he and my mom, while we were living there, started in San Francisco and went along the coast north looking for where we would live and for him to set up a boat building business.
All right. We had my first technical difficulty of the podcast. I think we got it sorted out. So we're going to try to start where we left off. My apologies to the listeners. But if I remember correctly, your grandmother was your first teacher. That's right. Where we got cut off, hopefully.
Yeah. So, and she had taught in a number of settings. She'd been actually my mom's teacher in upstate New York, where she taught for a while, but she also taught in a prison, and she taught all grades, and later she started her own school. And we were her first sort of separate school in the community that we had there called Heartwood. And I wrote a poem about one of the experiences.
I'd love to. Okay. Please share.
And incidentally, I actually ended up publishing it in this month's North Columbia Monthly because I was in Michigan while I was putting that one to press and needed to fill a page.
And when did you write this?
I wrote this in 2018.
Okay.
On May 5th. So here's how it goes. The giant beech tree stood stoic despite being splintered and charred, collateral damage of Zeus's latest soap opera drama. It took 5 pairs of grade school arms to ring it, and half a day to fashion a ladder from branches and rope under the inquisitive guidance of our teacher, my grandmother. Reaching the girthy lower branches, horizontal trees in their own right, bark stretched around like silver gray skin. we found our new favorite spots, close to the trunk where we could break off charred chunks of lightning wood and press our imagination in rough black shadings into the living canvas, while my grandmother read to us, her legs dangling, heels barely below the branch she perched on, like the glasses on her nose. Once, when sitting in the silence of forest sounds after a chapter was done, a red fox glided into view below us, nostrils wide at the foreign scents on our crude but serviceable ladder. Another time, a pileated woodpecker scritched its four-toed way around the trunk, listening for insect activity below the bark, not expecting children above, and raised its red crest in incredulous alarm upon finding us in its avian domain. The woodpecker's dipping flight across the forest floor looked like a skipping stone seen from above. I don't remember now what stories she read. Like our charcoal tableaus, they have gently eroded into indiscernible memory. But the beach and my grandmother's creative care and determination that brought us to new heights and perspective have forever taken root in my consciousness, like the seedlings I found fed by and tenaciously pushing through the rotting leaves of last year under the remaining branches of the beach.
That was good.
Yeah.
What a cool depiction of childhood. Of, I mean, I was visually trying to imagine the setting through your words, and it was. Isn't it funny what's the word I'm trying to use? But maybe the importance that trees have in childhood. You know,
that's interesting. Yeah,
they provide so much adventure, right? Like. Today we get so bored and we see our kids, we push tablets in front of them or phones or whatever, but how many hours could a tree entertain you, know, in your youth and your childhood?
Absolutely.
And then it's also being used as a tool. Your grandma's sitting there, you're playing with it. Like it's this whole thing. And I thought that encompassed a lot of things that was based around a tree. And then we could get really deep on, out in the woods, but like all the metaphors of trees, right? And just the importance and the metaphorical value of trees, with roots and shelter and life, providing life for others. That was a good poem, man. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah. It seemed appropriate to the to really encapsulate a moment in time and convey some a sense of what that was about, and how that really helped shape part of who I was, that kind of a childhood. I spent a lot of time in the woods. And
what a great way to learn. One of my gripes now with how the school system is set up is I personally don't believe that kids should be in a desk for 6 hours,
right.
And to hear, being outside and more of a one-on-one interaction and, being able to use your creative mind in the surroundings that surround you. I think that's what a neat way to get introduced into learning. Yeah. Powerful.
Well, and on that note, so my mom and stepdad split up and we left Port Townsend. And we had a neighbor down the way whose name was also Robin. We called her Lady Robin. He was Man Robin.
Okay.
And she had and still has a daughter who's 8 years younger than I. So the two moms and the two kids went in on 120 acres up on First Thought Mountain by Orient.
Oh, yeah.
And I was 15 at the time. And so my mom elected to have me homeschool. And as a side note, incidentally, the very first person that we met when we moved here was Deirdre Abide, who was the Irish step dance teacher.
Yeah.
And we met her in the course that we needed for my mom to take to be able to legally homeschool me in Washington State at the time. You had a certain number of hours clocked in. And I attended it too, since I was planning to be taking a lead role in my own education.
Okay.
So Deirdre was there because she was going to do the same with her kids. So that was the first person that we met, and she was wonderful. She was so welcoming and lovely to get to know. And over the years, we were close with that family and remain so. My daughters right now take Irish step dances dance lessons from her daughter, Claire. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
That's cool. I never got to know her personally, but knew lots of people and had friends that had been through the dance academy.
Yeah.
I've had the honor to get to know Simon, over the years. And I think I don't know much about it, but I've just always respected and thought it was cool, the building that they built by the bank and just that community that, a lot of kids have spent a lot of hours over there,
Oh, yeah.
And so I think, I've never heard a bad thing about her, and it seemed like she's been deeply missed.
Yeah. She was a beloved in the community for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I did work for Simon for a little while too, doing house construction stuff. And
Cool.
yeah, so, but so she was the first one we met. And so we bought bare land. And
How do they figure out where Orient is from Central Oregon, or how do you guys?
Yeah. Well, so we'd gone to Port Townsend. We're there for 4 years. And then Lady Robin, had spent a little time in the Onion Creek area previously. She grew up in Washtenaw, wheat field country, and grew up working on a wheat field, working farm. And her dad was, I believe, second generation wheat farmer. So she was third. And then her daughter drove wheat truck in the summers too.
Cool.
So even though they lived up here. So that I think was what brought them over here, looking for something different. And my mom's side of the family is deep Scottish roots, and we have a thing for castles and being up high and that sort of thing.
Okay.
So we chose the end of the property that was pretty remote. It was about 2 miles of mountain driveway, all uphill.
That's cool. I go up there. I tried at least once a fall. I'll go to the very top.
Oh,
grouse hunting or just for a Sunday drive. But
sure. Yeah.
Yeah. That area is beautiful.
Yeah.
Was your property have that? There's that lake up there, right? About halfway up on the right.
We were on the western slope.
Okay. Gotcha.
So our driveway access was up from Rock Cut Road.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and then from there we backed up against Forest Service, where our property ended. And so from there there was nobody.
Yeah.
And so I would there were occasions where I hiked up to the top, and it was about a 4-hour hike from my place.
That's a beautiful area to grow up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my mom and I wanted to build a castle, but we realized we didn't have the tools or know how to build with stone. So, and we learned about straw bale construction at that time. There were some articles out and that kind of thing. Of course, we didn't have internet or any of that sort of stuff. So it was reliant on magazines and books. And so we got some information about that. And we actually were living in a teepee on that end of the property, and with 2 cats. And that was how we started up in northeastern Washington.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So, and we used the People Place General Store. They had a shower down there, so, and do our laundry there. And the post office used to be at the little house there.
Yep.
And
right when you cross the tracks on the left. Yeah.
So that was home since 15 and until going away to college. And when we first lived there, I was pretty into the whole sort of mountain man perspective, and I was really into tracking, and I started getting into wildlife photography at that time, and we had no money. We were, very, very strapped for cash. And so I made every picture count, and early on started a photography business as a way to pay for my film.
Okay.
So I made photo note cards and enlargements and those kinds of things. And that was part of the start of my real entrepreneurship too. At age 15 is when I started my own business, First Thought Photos.
Wow.
And that was the genesis of what has come today.
Yeah.
What started there.
How was teepee living?
It got cold when winter set in.
You guys did a winter in the teepee?
We had to vacate. It got too cold. And my mom had a sweetie up in Canada named Walter, about 3 hours north near Nakusp.
Oh yeah.
And so we ended up actually going up there for the winter. We went north.
That's a beautiful area too.
It is.
Yeah.
And Walter was divorced with 3 boys, the oldest of which was just a little younger than me and became my best friend,
Cool.
Tio. So he and I we were learning guitar together. We were sure that if we, got a motorcycle, if we had the motorcycle, the guitar, and the leather jacket, we were sure to get the girl. That was
Sounds like a pretty solid plan.
right.
Yeah.
So yeah, we were deep in it, trying to pull that off.
So then did you and your mom end up building a straw bale house?
We did.
And how was that process?
It was an enormous learning experience. So
Is that a dirt foundation?
no, we poured a slab.
Okay.
Yep. And the first guy that they sent up from the concrete company, he said, he radioed back and said, "Come on up." He said, "I'll go anywhere." So they sent me first, and it is this winding driveway, 2 miles up, and it has some tight turns. And
Wow.
it was amazing. They got a cement truck up there. So we poured a slab. So in the house is a rectangle gable roof and then a 2-story octagon tower on one corner, and those are the 2 bedrooms. So it was a really beautiful layout and
Cool.
wonderful space to be in.
And was it off grid? Did you guys have water and power there?
No electricity, no phone, gravity fed water system from Pelkey Creek.
And did you guys implement that as far as being able to use, get water to the house? Did you put in that infrastructure?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. So we had a guy that came up and with his little backhoe and dug this water line. And some days he would only get 30 feet in an entire day. It was so rocky.
Wow.
And then we hand filled it back in. So
wow.
yeah.
And so
that was Steve Cochran.
I don't know him.
Yeah. He's if you go to any of the car shows in the summer, he's
Okay.
usually there. So
Gotcha.
yep.
But that's basically how you lived during high school.
Yep. So that was we didn't have money to plow in the winter. So once it snowed enough that the car couldn't get up, then we hiked all winter. And that meant pulling laundry and propane and dog food up on the sled.
Did you ever look at that as like a chore, or did you find joy in that? Were you ever upset with your living arrangement?
I was very sort of adaptable and accepting of circumstances growing up. And so I just sort of adapted and went with it. And it was just, that was my life, so, there was, certainly occasions where I was incredibly lonely. Being a teenager with, no other kids around and not going to high school and having that experience.
Did you have much social interaction?
Not really. Yeah.
That'd be hard.
When we visit with Walter and Tio, or Tio would come down or I'd go up there.
Yeah.
Once I got my driver's license, that changed things. And then before I talk about that though, I was going to mention that when we first there, I was talking about the sort of being into the mountain man thing.
Yeah.
So down along the valley is the railroad. And I thought, how cool would it be if I could tell the time based on the rail traffic? So I started keeping a log thinking that, I'd be like, oh, it's 8:30. And they're like, how do you know?
Hear the train go by?
Yeah. So I was very disappointed to discover it didn't keep a regular enough schedule. Yeah. So, but I ended up going to Panorama Alternative School in Colville.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, it was originally started for pregnant teens.
Yeah.
And then it exploded as an alternative school for kids, mostly kids that were having a hard time in school, were into drugs, those kinds of things. I was not part of that scene or group at all, but I was looking for sort of a customized, tailored education. To that point, I'd been, reading a lot and building a house, and on the house building, we had a framer from Republic come over, and I apprenticed with him, and he helped us build the skeleton that then, so the straw bale filled in rather than being load bearing.
Wow.
And so we framed it all in, roofed it, all that sort of thing, under his tutelage, and he'd bring a generator. So that was how I learned how to use some of the power tools and that kind of thing. But everything else was hand tools.
Yeah.
So, and we didn't have like nail guns or an air compressor or anything like that. So I in a single day nailed the entire plywood roof on. My
Wow.
arm was so sore.
I can't, dude. I take for granted, we use a lot of tooling for my job, and a lot of it is cordless now, and it's just evolved so much. And
Yeah.
the days that we do have to, use a wrench or, it's funny. It just like, and I'm in decent shape now, but just being on my back and like if I have to turn something with a normal end wrench, I'm like, oh, my arm's getting tired. Or to your point, just hammering in a dozen nails. Like I bet doing a roof was a workout.
It was. I started early in the morning and it was getting dark when I finished. And
I bet you got good with a hammer.
oh, I was real good.
Are you good at
bum bum?
What's that game? And I've only played it in Canada, but you sit around a stump and there's nails and you grab a hammer. Have you played that?
I haven't. No.
Have you been to the steam shovel in Roslyn?
Yes.
So they used to have one actually in there when I was in my early 20s, and you'd sit around and whoever beat the nail in first, you got one whack and then you had to pass the hammer.
Gotcha.
And it was just something you do while you were drinking beers or whatever. But I bet you would have been really good at that.
Probably. Yep. Yeah. Every 6 inches along the seam. So that was a lot of nails.
So it's easy for me. Like I have zero experience in what you just described, right? Like as far as, living off grid without power, like very self-sufficient, isolated. And now in my, at 35 in my midlife, like I kind of yearn for that. Like I can glorify that of, there's so many days where I feel like I'm attached to my phone or to the computer and TV and just always going. And I'm thinking it'd be so nice to have a place off grid. I never took time to learn how to become a builder. And I think that's even an insecurity that I have. And I don't know if it's like a manly thing, but I feel like you should know how to build things. I'm a very, like mediocre mechanic, right? Like I can adjust a carburetor and I can do basic things. I'm not great by any means. And I really take pride in that. It's fun to be able to diagnose and fix. And I like small engines, dirt bike, snowmobile stuff is where I kind of cut my teeth. But I've always felt that there'd be a real sense of accomplishment in building a structure and one that you would actually stay in, that could put a roof over your head.
Yeah.
But as someone who's lived it, like, do you ever reminisce? I mean, do you ever wish to go back to that? Is it, because like I said, it's easy from my side of the table to say, oh my God, that must be so awesome. And then I can watch YouTube videos of people living like that, but that's a lot of work, right? Like that's a tremendous amount of work when you're talking about food storage, you're packing in propane tanks, the water line freezes, you got a shovel and the ground's frozen, like, but I also have to believe too, that there's some meaning in that struggle, of that resiliency and being self-reliant. But do you ever, where that was such a formidable part of your life, I guess one, do you ever go back to living like that with your family? Like, do you guys do off weekend, off grid camping, or do you go back and visit that house, or, is that still a part of your life and how you live?
Not so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate your comments about that. Having children and thinking about what their experience is versus mine, and how to orchestrate their growing up in a sense, in a way that gives them the best that I can give them as a dad. I think about those things,
Yeah.
So I'm grateful that some of my children had the opportunity to actually spend time in that house.
Cool.
Because later in life, my mom was back living there after being in Scotland for 8 years, where she was married to a fellow there in Scotland. But she came back to be by her grandkids, and they, before they were in school, would stay with Grandma Lauren and up on the mountain. So it was always just called the mountain. Yeah. And so that I'm really grateful that they got those experiences.
Is that still in your family?
It's not.
Okay.
And that was a really hard thing because I thought it always would be.
Yeah.
And since it was sold, there were changes made, and I just haven't wanted to go back because
for sure
that was such a special time and place.
Yeah.
But in terms of romanticizing that sort of lifestyle, I would say a couple things about it. One, it's probably not for everybody.
Yeah.
I'm really grateful to have had that experience. And I would readily and easily go back to something like that with some modifications. I appreciate the awareness and sensitivity to your environs when you're living that way.
I bet.
To be really keenly aware, of
You have to be one with your surroundings
in a sense,
and with the land.
Yeah, very much so. And I feel like that for me, like when I went away to college, I went to Western Washington University in Bellingham. I felt like there was, for me, like this core base strength of character and just like a fuel within me that had been built up from living on the mountain. And to a degree, I still feel like it's there. And that to me is such a valuable thing.
I feel like the story that you just shared, we could connect all sorts of parallels to then like business and entrepreneurship, because it takes a lot of resiliency to be in business, and you have to be very adaptable.
Yep.
And you have to accept that things are out of your control. The water line freezes sometimes, and I think I see some people that don't have that muscle built and they get eaten by business, because business isn't for everybody.
Yep.
And I even struggle with that at times. I work really hard to strengthen that muscle, but I would have to believe that you had a lot of hours spent before you even then went into, first your photography business, but then these other endeavors that we'll get into, like you already had a pretty calloused, muscle in regards to that resiliency. And so I bet that I could see why that would be special for you. Like it really did help chisel and carve, I would imagine, maybe some of the successes that you've had now later in your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great.
And there were some key people too along the way in that time. So when I went to Panorama, it was largely to have some social connection and also, to advance my learning. And so I tested was able to skip a grade and became fast friends with one of the teachers there, Dave Gordon. I don't know if you've ever heard of him or not, but he was a longtime local person involved.
Did he used to write in the paper?
I don't think so. I don't think he did that. But he did climb Mount Everest.
Wow.
Among other accomplishments. And he loved mountain climbing. And he had a cabin up on Mingo. And so oftentimes I would actually stay with him rather than trying to commute all the way back up to Orient during the week. So I would get a ride with Herb Hippler.
Because he lives north of the bridge.
Yeah. So, and sometimes Donna, both of them worked at Hughescraft at the time.
Okay.
So, and I love it that, so I used to ride in this white Ford, what is it? An Escort, white Ford Escort.
Yeah.
That Herb had. And now his son, Caden, drives it. Same car.
That's awesome.
And Caden and my son, Alex, are fast friends.
Cool.
So it's really cool.
That's a fun full circle moment.
Yeah, it is. But anyway, Dave Gordon was one of those influential people in my life. And I really appreciated being able to spend time with him, and both as a teacher and as a friend, and in some ways as a father figure.
Yeah.
So
how was the integration to the social world as a teenager, being pretty far removed from it? Was that a tough integration, or did you fall into suit pretty?
It was a little bit difficult because, I wasn't into what all the other kids were. Yeah. And so I did feel isolated.
And this is early 90s?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep, yeah. Exactly. And I also was pretty, my wife sometimes calls me a Fez, a foreign exchange student, because I grew up without TV. I didn't know pop culture. I, was unconnected to those kinds of things.
Well, and that was kind of the beginning in the early 90s, late 80s, especially on like the music scene and MTV and
all that sort of thing.
That's when that stuff really just started blowing up.
Yeah.
So that would be pretty wild to not have that exposure and then be with everyone that had that.
Yeah. So it was, I had this great sense of not being cool,
Yeah.
But at Panorama, they had a broom closet that we converted into a darkroom. And there was a guy who had the stained glass business that is now where it's on Astor, where the coffee shop is now. John Sconce was his name. And he taught me some basics of how to do darkroom work.
And that's developing photos? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So I ended up running the darkroom at the Panorama School. And it was interesting because I would have different fellow students who would want to learn what I was doing. And in that sort of, in that small space in the dark, we would have conversations while we were doing what we were doing. And it often turned into almost like a therapy section.
Okay.
Which, I was honored to be confided in. I was a good listener, and it was sort of, in the dark, it felt safe, and so I got to hear a lot of people's problems.
Wow.
In the darkroom.
Yeah.
While teaching them about photography. So I ended up getting recruited by Don Birch from the Statesman Examiner. He had a elderly gentleman who was retiring from his darkroom at the newspaper. And so that was how I ended up getting into the newspaper world, was going to work for him. So I took a year off after graduating from Panorama and before going to college, did a gap year.
Gotcha.
And I worked at the Statesman in the darkroom.
Do you enjoy that?
It was a lot.
Yeah.
We at that time published a number of papers for the region.
Okay.
And
was that out of the building that you're in now? Okay.
Yep. And so in the darkroom was no bigger than this space, and full of equipment and poorly ventilated. And so it was a challenging work environment.
Yeah.
And it was long hours, and you worked till it was done. If it wasn't, you worked the set hours, you worked till it was done.
Is that a minimum wage gig at that time?
Yeah.
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 You remember what that was?
I would think I was, no, I don't. Cause I was going to say it was like 15,000 a year, but I think that's when I came back later as a reporter. It was 15,000 a year. So, yeah, but I learned so much, and it was a real confidence boost for me, and a lot of growing, to be in that job, and to be at the nexus point of the whole process of a newspaper, because what happens in the darkroom there is critical to all the other steps that follow. And if I do a poor job there, then they can't fix it. It can only be as good as what I produce in the darkroom.
It's a lot of responsibility.
Yes. Yeah. So in that, and it was, high pressure time schedule type thing, and that sort of thing. And I was in charge of all the equipment and all the chemicals, and, just managing all of that. So, and at that time we were doing wax paper and scissors layout. So we'd have these sheets of paper that had blue lines on them that were the size of a newspaper. And in the darkroom, when you shoot the pages, those blue lines don't show up.
Okay.
So they're invisible, basically. And so then we did have computers, little 9-inch screens,
Wow.
And for word processing, you'd print out your article, and then you'd run it through, you'd cut it up into the columns, and then you run it through a wax machine that would wax the back of the paper, and then you'd lay it out by hand on the paper, and that's how that got put together.
Wow.
Same with the pictures, same with the ads. Little divider lines was a roll of tape that had a black line in it, so you'd cut the little pieces of line, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, I didn't do much of the layout part of things, I would get what was laid out, which Dawn did most of the layout at that time. And, but I would help sometimes, particularly when we're running out of time.
Yeah.
And and later I came back and worked in the summers as a photographer. And then when I graduated from college, I came back and worked full time as a reporter and photographer. And I really liked going to the schools and taking the pieces of the entire process, from my initial notes from an interview to the typed up article, to the laid out page, to the giant negative that is shot, to then the plate that is put onto the press, to the final newspaper.
Yeah.
So, and just to show how there's so many steps and so many opportunities for things to go wrong.
So on that regard, and I've spoke about this a little bit before on the podcast, but I have a weird memory. Like I don't know if it's photographic or not, but like I have a pretty good memory on some things. In my first recollection, I remember it was 2004 and I was in Lynn Schott's class at the high school, and you came in and spoke to us.
Yeah.
And if I remember right, you had long hair at the time,
I
like
did.
a ponytail down to your back, and like and I remember it was something to do with the Statesman, and I don't even remember what you presented about. I just remember thinking that you were an interesting person. Like,
how cool.
Yeah. I just remembered your name. Like, I think that was probably the first time I'd heard Gabriel, to be honest, like that name. And I remember you coming in to Lynn's class, and that was 21 years ago, I guess I should make sure I'm right. Did you do that? Okay.
I did. Yeah. No,
I thought
that was the last time actually I did that.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and I remember that. That's great to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the same year I got married as well. So,
how was college for you?
College was amazing.
Okay.
I, at the time, thought I could just be a college student forever. I mean, it was so cool. All the things I took a full 18 to 21 credits every quarter.
Yeah.
Worked half-time, 20 hours a week at the library on campus. I was in special collections, and so I got to help people with their projects.
Cool.
So that was really fun to get to see the different things they were doing. And
Yeah.
then we had all the rare books as well. So I got to see Canterbury Tales, and
Oh, wow.
it's all a white glove type thing,
Oh, that's
with
cool.
the locked room.
Yeah.
So, but then we had, all the microfilm and microfiche and all the newspapers and scientific journals.
And so did you end up getting a journalism degree?
I didn't. I got a interdisciplinary degree because I had too many things I was interested in.
For sure.
But communications was a big theme in that. So if I were to go back to school, I'd probably actually want to get some business training, because everything I've done has been, self-taught or learned on the job type of thing. So
2 cents on that. I have a degree in psychology and business, and all of the business knowledge that I feel that I've learned has been School of Hard Knocks.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's a pretty broad assessment. I don't mean to say that I didn't learn anything about business at school.
Sure. I
didn't feel that it was tailored to small business at all. A lot of it was macro. The accounting portions that we had to take was definitely helpful. I definitely learned accounting on a basic level, which you have to know to be able to run a business profitably anyways. But the other stuff, it was just macroeconomics and, interesting, but not really that attainable. And then I think some of I told you offline, still am, but critical of people. I felt that I was being taught by people that hadn't done the thing. It's like, here's your textbook, read the chapter. And I'm like, well, have you ever ran a business? Let's do that. But yeah, I was just found it interesting that you said, I'd like to go back. And parts of me wishes that I would have just gone right into work and worked for more other people than my family business, and maybe even started something of my own at a younger age, just to go through and make my real life tuition payments.
Yep.
I did real quick though, to just sidetrack for a minute. I'm curious, at that time, that's the mid 90s that you're in school.
Yep.
In
94 to
college?
98. Yep.
Are you able, and I mean you specifically, but just the general student population? Are you able to work a part-time job, get a few scholarships, and pay for tuition, or are you leaving school with a fair amount of debt?
I was incredibly fortunate in that my aunt and uncle, Alex and Deidrea, helped me through school.
Cool.
Because I didn't know about scholarships, for example. I definitely qualified for financial aid based on my income. I guess I didn't have any.
Yeah.
But they were, so between their support and then working 20 hours a week, so I finished with my degree with no debt.
Good for you. Yeah. Have you looked at tuition prices lately?
Oh yeah, I've got a son who's going to college this fall. So.
I just watched a video on it last week and I was blown away.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like it was sometime in that, I think it maybe started in the earlier 80s. You know, I think, and I'm speaking anecdotally, like I don't actually know this, just from things that I've listened to and read, but you used to be able to kind of work a summer job and put yourself through school.
Mm-hmm.
But then it seems like when we got these federal backed loans that then tuition started getting jacked, you know, and I was also, to be transparent, I was very fortunate. My parents put me through school.
Mm-hmm.
I was the first on both sides, my mom and dad, to go through school. I think it was important for them that I did that. I had a lot of friends that weren't as fortunate and left with, I mean, a handful and 6 digits worth of debt. Mm-hmm. And then you enter the world at 30 grand a year.
Yeah.
And you're just buried.
You're in the hole to start with.
Like for your life,
yeah.
You know, because one day you're going to want to get married and have a mortgage and a car. And it's just like that part of it. I don't have the answer, so I try not to be like super critical of it, but it does seem that would be difficult, you know, to bite that burden off at 18. I'm just trying to put myself in the shoes of an 18-year-old, you know, middle-class America wanting to go to school. Like that's a big thing to bite off that can stay with you for a while.
Yeah. And it's a hard thing that way too, because the experience can be so valuable.
For sure.
And, but yeah.
So can you put a price tag on experience, right? Like,
but to start in the hole is a challenge for sure. So, and that's, I mean, I've, with many of my businesses, that's usually you have to go into debt to get started. So, yeah.
Did you know that you wanted to come back after college?
So not specifically, no. It was sort of an opportunistic thing. I didn't have somewhere else to go instead.
Okay.
Basically. And you know, my mom was no longer living on the mountain, so I had the house to come to and a job waiting for me. And so it was a way to step into the next phase, a low barrier to entry.
Yeah, for sure.
In a sense. So, and I didn't have, like a roadmap that I was following of where I was going to be going.
Yeah.
So my goal with college had been to build as big of a tool belt as possible so that wherever I ended up in life, I would have tools that I could use to be able to make a living while pursuing what I was passionate about.
I think there's a lot of value in that. I feel that as a society, we put too much pressure on kids at 18 to have the roadmap, and I look back at 18 and, I remember our school counselors, what do you want to do? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I want to hang out with my friends,
right.
And so I feel that that's a lot of the pressure that has inflowed a lot of people into college of like, well, this is the next step to the roadmap to then be able to get a career and then start your, and I think there's a lot of value of not having that and being in the present moment. And to your point, building up your tool belt to be able to that creates freedom then, to be able to be multifaceted, and I think we need to try to do a better job of promoting our youth to have a tool belt, and not get too hung up on if you don't know what you want to be when you're 40 at 18. I really believe you got your 20s to figure it out, and you should go try a bunch of different things and see what sticks.
Yeah.
I think there's a ton of value in that. I used to laugh at, I used to snowmobile outside of Whistler quite a bit. And I'm an introvert, but I'm also in the right setting, a social butterfly, you know, like I don't like big groups of people, but I do like going out and meeting people and talking and whatnot. And I used to think it was kind of lame. I would meet people from Australia that were working in Whistler on a gap year. And I'm like, what is a gap year? They're like, oh, we just take a year off and travel and work. And I'm like, you guys are morons. Like, that's the laziest thing I've ever heard, you know? And I was really judgmental on that. And now, you know, where I'm at, I'm like, I wish I would have done that. Like what a, you know, my daughter's 16 and we don't talk a whole bunch about what she's doing after school, but, you know, she goes, well, what do you think I should do? I said, I think you should just go somewhere and live and work and just get outside of Kettle Falls for a little bit and put yourself and immerse yourself in a different setting and get a couple different jobs and see different things. Or if there's a art school or, you know, just whatever it is that you're into, follow that, versus trying to have your life figured out at 18 to 22.
Yeah,
you know,
I agree.
I don't know how you felt when you were 18, but I definitely felt the pressure of, get the degree, get the job, start your life. And I just feel like there's way more to that, you know, that, and I think if we had, you know, my graduating class of 50 in this room, I would probably assume that most of them felt the way that I just described.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that true with your son who's in college? Did he feel that pressure? And maybe not him individually, but like as a whole, like in his class?
So, well, he's going to be going to college this fall.
Okay.
So he's a senior. And he's, you know, like I said, very entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
And, doesn't feel, you know, like there's a lot of other people in his class that are thinking the ways that he does, or, you know, have the same ambitions. That sort of thing. So
he's stoked.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he's actually, to, you know, be honest, he's doing college because he sees it as a good experience.
Yeah.
But he also, you know, like what you're talking about with the sort of questioning the professor as to whether you've actually run a business. You know, he has a lot of that. Like he feels like he's learned a lot from mentors and reading things and online and from his own dad and those kinds of things. So, but he's seeing the value of what college can also provide.
Yeah.
And I really admire his willingness as a teenage boy to be open to other perspectives of what other people think, and to, you know, really listen to those things. He makes his own opinions, and I completely respect that.
Yeah.
But he's really willing to be open to other perspectives, and I think that's something that I feel like as a community is a really valuable thing. You know, that's what I've sought to do with the North Columbia Monthly. You know, when I took that over in 2015, it used to be a publication that came from a particular perspective. It was an alternative news source. I rebranded it January 1 of 2016 when I launched that. New look, new everything. And I took out, you know, politics and all that sort of thing and made it about where and how we live. And really tried to build on that idea that everybody here is neighbors. We're all neighbors. And we can have different perspectives. We can, you know, go to a different church or not church, or, you know, whatever it is. But if somebody's stuck in a snowbank, you know, and they're your neighbor, you're going to help them out.
For sure.
Like that kind of sense of community to me. Like I've never asked or sought to try and have people think the same, or, you know, agree even. That's not what I'm after. What I'm after is that idea of neighborliness and that willingness to coexist.
For sure.
So that's what I've really tried to foster with this publication, and I feel like it's been working.
Do you mind if I share and read your note from the publisher?
Yeah, sure.
Because I feel like it's so well articulated of like what you just said. So I think this is included in every publication.
Yeah.
So for our listeners, I really do recommend checking out the North Columbia Monthly. And I'm reading this from page 5, which is a note from the publisher, which is Gabriel. The North Columbia Monthly is a free monthly magazine distributed throughout northeastern Washington and is a vehicle for sharing stories that we can relate to, imagine, or feel. It is about where and how we live. And emphasizing these kinds of stories, it is my hope that the idea of connection, common ground, and community will be infused into our consciousness and become integral to what we choose to strive for and what is considered the norm. I believe that we can all have different perspectives, different viewpoints, different ways of being, and I believe that we can find connection and build community around the things we share in common. Thank you for reading. I hope you feel enriched for having done so. And so I read that, I think the first time, because I'm not going to blow smoke at you and say that I've been like a reader since 2016. You know, I pick it up when I see it.
Sure.
And I remember it was last fall I picked this up and I'd read that. And I don't know if I'd read it before, but I definitely know last fall it like spoke to me. And I've talked about this before, but you know, this podcast that we're doing now had been in my brain for a couple years. And a lot of the reason why it took so long was fear, you know, of me wanting one of my, you know, things that I'm trying to continuously work on, but I always have a lot of ideas and I hardly see them through. You know, I always have these really cool ideas, but then I never get to that next step. And, last fall, like I could just feel that I was getting closer to doing this podcast. Like the time was coming right and I had to do it, you know? And I remember reading this and it gave me a lot of hope of like what you put in print there basically summarizes what I'm trying to do here. It's just through a different means. You're doing it in print and I'm trying to do it, you know, through podcasting, but it really aligned with the values and what my idea is for this platform of the Grange podcast. And I remember and I read it and I was like, because the biggest thing that I had in fear of stopping me to do this is like, well, is it well received? Does anyone else think the way that I think? Like, what if they don't think that way? And, you know, what if I'm vulnerable and then people think I'm a dork for being vulnerable? And after I read that, I was like, oh, one other guy thinks that way, you know, and literally like I didn't know you or have a ton of interaction, but it gave me hope that there was one other person in the community that I guess A, not only thought that way, but then B, was doing something about it. And in this publication of saying, here's a free publication to the community for the community to bring community together. And I was like, cool. It really did serve as a motivational factor for me. Then I feel like it kind of just put me over the edge of like, okay, I got to do this now. It felt like I could piggyback that, if you will, and then see if I couldn't carve my own niche out through the microphones. So I appreciate that. That's well written.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, for sure. What's your experience been with this publication? 2016, you facelift it, take the politics out of it. It's community. You've now built it on a foundation of community. Has it been a rewarding endeavor for you?
It has.
Yeah. And what aspects?
There's multiple. So it's frankly, it's been an honor because I'm being a vehicle for people's stories, for a community to be sharing stories with itself. And there have been multiple occasions where really cool things have happened through that. Families that had lost track of each other from even generationally have reconnected through it. You know, somebody was writing about somebody's ancestors and they're like, I know that person, you know, and connections have been made that way. People feel like they learn things. I get phone calls, emails, letters in the mail every month, you know, people just gushing about how much it means to them, which is wonderful. It's so rewarding.
Yeah.
So, and for the writers themselves, there's a full gamut of people that, I think one maybe didn't even graduate high school to professional published writers, so it's
the full gamut.
It's a range of voices.
Yeah.
And, in the editing, there's a lot of care taken in really preserving the voice while also applying, certain standards of for the publication to be a quality publication. So,
Yeah.
And it's interesting too to see how themes emerge that are so often seasonally tied. I never tell the writers what to write about. They just organically produce what they feel inspired to produce or wish to share. What I do tell them is that they can never tell people how it is, and they can never tell people what to think. And so that's
maybe that's why it's refreshing to read.
Right. Is my and in a sense it was a social experiment, because I started off with sort of an intuitive sense that as people converse and connect, that if someone is being told how it is, sweeping generalizations about people, or telling somebody what to think, that this is how you should be thinking about this thing. This is how you should act about this thing. This is what you should care about. That immediately narrows the field of potential for connection, because then that person is going to be thinking, okay, is this really true for me? And if it's not, then there becomes a separation. And many times a reader, if in my opinion and view, if they're feeling like what the writer is saying is not true for them, then that, in a sense, devalues the whole thing, and it can spread into having that perspective against the whole publication.
Well, and I think to throw another dynamic in, being vulnerable with you, is like in a small community, like I recognize some of the contributors' names, and I don't know them on a personal level, but I've maybe been told by others how to think about them or what's going on.
Right.
And so it really challenges me as the reader to see a name that I recognize and already have predisposed thoughts and feelings about, not based on my own interaction, but just based on community interaction, and then still try to read with an open mind,
right,
and try to understand their perspective and them as people versus, and that's a difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
Like, this is a muscle building thing for me sometimes, to say, okay, drop my preconceived notions at the door and just read it with an open mind. And I think there's value in doing that, of trying to work on that side of my brain, because a lot of my life I've been very just apt to, this is how I feel about this. And there's not any changing my mind, and I don't know. I've lived a lot of years like that, and it feels, I think, more in alignment to challenge that and be more open-minded while still having a very strong base, but not to a fault, and that's a balancing act. And I haven't quite figured that out, but it's something that I'm always working to attain.
I admire you for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, in this publication, I'm always looking for new writers and trying to encourage differing voices.
Yeah.
To be transparent, though, this last year it's been, sort of on autopilot, essentially, because I've got so much on my plate.
Yeah.
And it's been, I've been really grateful for all the support I've gotten, and everyone contributing in the ways that they do. But I see opportunities to do things better. But I can only do so much right now.
So in something like this, like it's 9 years, that you've put into it, is there, and I just don't know your side of the business, as far as journalism and publications and editing and things, but is there room for delegation? Like, obviously you've honed a skill set. You're a black belt, if you will, in publishing, and so, there's got to be a a correlation to, the success or the viewership or the number, however you view that in your world, due to the fact that you've put your thumbprint on it, right? Like, and you found a set of ingredients that works. It bakes an edible cookie, if you will. But is there a time, because I think that's something that a lot of business owners face, is especially if you own 4 or 5 different businesses or you're into 4 or 5 different endeavors, is how do you manage all that? And I have learned, and I'm on a way smaller level, but just like the delegating piece, I mentioned earlier that I'm a decent mechanic, like try to hire mechanics far better than me, but is there room? The simple question is like, can you delegate a publishing position or someone to do the thing that you would feel good still having your name on into the community? Is that a struggle for you?
You've zeroed in on a key issue. So the North Columbia Monthly, like many publications, particularly free ones, its only source of revenue is ad sales.
Yeah.
And so it's challenging in a small rural area to generate a lot of income that way. And so I had at various times looked to delegate, like you say, but the publication does not generate sufficient revenue to be able to afford that.
So it's more funding than personnel.
Well, then there's also, the skill sets, and we have a pretty small talent pool.
I didn't think
to pull
about
from.
that. Yeah.
So there's both those challenges.
Yeah. Those are big challenges.
Yeah. So, and I have at various times over the years tried to do that. And each time I just couldn't make it pencil out, or it just didn't work out.
Yeah.
And so what changed was this last year. Actually 2 years ago is when I had some family visiting, and we'd gone up to the Stevens County Historical Center in Colville there.
I've never been there.
Oh, you should check it out.
I should.
It's huge, and it's pretty amazing what they've done up there. So, and Don Birch, my former Boston publisher, he volunteers up there most days of the week. And in one of the rooms, they have their set up a display of all the newspapers from this area, which there were quite a few from 100 years ago coming forward. It's really odd, and they have some old equipment there, from journalism and those sort of things. And there's also a picture of Don Birch, his first day on the job as a reporter. There was a double bank robbery in Colville.
No way.
So he's got stories. But being there in that corner and remembering, all the time I'd spent at the newspaper, and having people over the last few years as I've run the monthly, say, is there any way you could take on the paper, because it was dwindling. It was under corporate ownership, and the people that had been doing it were retiring and were usually not replaced. That just their duties were redistributed to a smaller and smaller crew. That it was. I won't go into all that.
Yeah.
But there were challenges there, and the paper was really struggling. And so being there, that sort of clinched it for me. It's like, this is such an important part of a community. It's the historical record. It's the sports pictures that clip out for grandpa and grandma and put on the fridge. It's the local news that's going on. We have in this day and age so many sources of information and news, but so much of it is filtered through a particular perspective and lens. So much of it does not necessarily adhere to journalism standards. There are media companies that have a particular agenda that they're using the power of the press for, all those sort of things. And then our local reporting is basically you got Facebook.
Yeah.
And so I did some research on it and found that nationwide, that the mid-size newspapers were dying out because they were trying to be everything to everyone, and they just couldn't generate the revenue, so they're closing. The big ones, they're in it. They're adapting. They're finding ways to be digital, be print, do what they need to do. And then the small ones that are corporate owned, which at one time there were a lot of buyouts that were happening in a lot of corporate owned portfolios in small town newspapers. A lot of those are folding. But the local papers that are locally owned and family owned, they were seeing a resurgence. And so, because, the reality of how much we are digital now is a legitimate concern, is print something I want to be investing in? Is a good way to go? And the reality is that also that people in our region still love print, and it's important. And because of those statistics and because of my own experience with newspaper and understanding how valuable that local publication is to people, you yourself have your own stories about it.
Yeah.
That prompted me to go ahead with trying to take on the Statesman Examiner and revive it. So, but the current model that it was under, I wasn't seeing how it could work.
Because there's two things there. There's your effort and wanting to provide a local newspaper, and you've seen the value, and you were actually, had been part of that value. So you actually had boots on the ground experience, and that's on one side of the sword. And on the other side of, well, it's a business transaction, and you can't do it if it doesn't make sense, right? Are those the two things that you're kind of tackling?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you can't just be 100% philanthropic with it.
Right.
Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Okay. With doing it just because you want the greater good of the community, or maybe you can, but most of us can't, right? Like it's got to be able to make some kind of bottom line sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do you make that? How do you make those two come to one?
Well, so this goes back to your question about the monthly. So the concept I came up with was to form the Inland Northwest Media Group. And so that is a business that hires the staff. And then the staff provide professional services to each of the publications. And so then each publication pays into that group. And so then collectively, the North Columbia Monthly can benefit from the professional expertise of that staff without having to carry the full weight of the cost.
So is that staff essentially a subcontractor?
No, the staff are hired by the company, so they're not contractors.
Gotcha.
They're employees.
Okay.
So that business structure is an S corp. And then I put each of the publications into an LLC. And so North Columbia Monthly is its own business. Statesman Examiner is its own business. And it also has the Sun, the advertiser. Deer Park Tribune is its own business.
So there's enough trim on the table for the higher producing ones to be able to also make up for the ones that aren't maybe producing as much. Am I thinking about that right? Like
in part,
I'm trying to think of the collective of the inland. What was the name of the group?
Inland Northwest Media Group.
So the Inland Northwest Media Group, essentially you're funding that as one, and then it's propping up these other LLCs.
Right.
But you still have to bring in money from somewhere, right?
So, and each of them are paying into that.
But there's probably a few that are paying more than the others. And so you had to probably break all that down, right, to see if that was sustainable.
So in knowing that I was going to head into that, prior to taking on the Statesman Examiner, I also took on the Huckelberry Press. So that's another publication that I have. And I had learned that the fellow running it was going to close it. And rather than close it, I suggested, we do a transfer of ownership and I hire him back during the interim and that sort of thing. So it originally started just because I wanted his racks because they're really expensive to buy.
Yeah.
But then it grew into, well, how about I take on the whole business? Because the Huckelberry Press was a pretty beloved publication It distributes to 12 counties of Eastern Washington and North Idaho.
I didn't know it was that big.
Yeah. So 20,000 copies a month.
Really?
Yep. So, but like the North Columbia Monthly, the Huckelberry Press, this last year has really been on autopilot as well. You know, so both of them have opportunities for improvement and expansion. But
are you worried at all looking forward that the demographic of the readership is in the baby boomer demographic? Like, I don't know many people my age, and definitely none my kids' age, that are reading the paper still.
Right.
It's like, I'm kind of bummed about it. You know, like, I feel like my age group of guys and gals aren't really well informed of local things. And I see that on other fronts. I've attended city hall meetings, you know, Kettle and Colville, school board, and then I tried to make most of the political town halls, or whatever you might call them, the candidate nights last fall. Just trying to be informed, you know, an informed voter for once in my life.
Good for you. And
I say this respectfully, but I'm the youngest one there by 20 or 30 years.
Yeah.
You know, and it was all 60 plus, it felt like. And then when in the circles that I run around with, we're not talking about what we read in the Statesman last week or the candidate night or whatever. So do you have any way of tracking that demographic of who your readers are?
An easy one is that we give a senior discount. So, I mean, we can see how many subscriptions or senior discounts to pull that. But I think, to answer your question more, I feel like people age into reading it.
Okay. That's fair. Yeah.
There are pockets of exception. For example, the Deer Park Tribune has been getting picked up a lot because of how much we've been running of school sports and school doings.
Yeah.
So it's really starting to get a readership in the school, which is pretty cool.
Oh yeah.
And where we just recently implemented an intern program for the Statesman.
They're doing great.
Yeah. And we've got somebody from Northport, somebody from Kettle, and 2 from Colville. And so, you know, starting to, you know, get those tendrils.
I was really impressed. I read, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, you introduced them as interns.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this could be interesting. You know, high school kid, young, like whatever. I've been very impressed with their ability to write. You know, and I'm no one to judge. Like, I don't have any ground to stand on what's good and what's bad. But just for me personally, like, I've been very impressed with these interns that you have. And I found interest in what they're writing about. The one with the prom dress was super interesting, I think this week. Yeah.
And she's only 16.
And it was cool to see the picture and the story. And like, I love that. I thought that was really neat. I enjoyed that aspect of the paper this week. It was good.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
That's a fascinating endeavor. The business model of what you took on, that's a lot of moving parts.
It is.
Yeah. And it's not locked in or guaranteed, right? There's a lot of variables that come with those moving parts.
Yep.
When it was corporately owned, was it for sale when you bought it, or did you approach them?
I approached them. Yep.
That's a tough position to be in.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
How'd that work?
Well, I'm not going to talk too much about that.
Yeah, that's fine.
There were some constraints on what I could say, and let's just say it was the most difficult business transaction I've ever done in my life.
Wow.
Yep.
Was there, you know, now sitting on the other side of that transaction, did you learn a lot?
I did.
Yeah.
Yep.
I bet.
Yep. I don't care to repeat it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fair. I'm not going to push you on that at all.
No, I mean, like, repeat the experience.
Oh, yeah. Yep. That one and done was good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what, are you a year into the Statesman?
Correct. May 1st was 1 year anniversary.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we officially joined the chamber and did a ribbon cutting, and then also joined the Washington Newspaper Publishers Association. So made those steps.
So how's the transition been from at 18 you're in the dark room and now you're the guy? Like, has that been a tough transition at all?
It's been
I mean, obviously that's a lot of years.
Yeah, it's been a decades long journey. So I being in a leadership role is something that I've really taken to heart as important, and really sought to do my best in, while it's being spread so thin. And I'm really grateful for the team that I have. It's a very small team, and they do a lot, and enormously grateful for them. Wouldn't be able to do it without them.
Yeah.
And they themselves have had steep learning curves in lots of areas. And our first day on the job was really challenging because the former owners did not want anyone to know that the transition was happening. And then when it did happen, they didn't provide any kind of transition support. So we walked in and we had less than a week to get 3 papers out.
Whoa.
Yeah. And adding to that was that there was a press at the Statesman that had been there for years. And in interests of improving print quality, we switched to the printer that I send my other publications to in Lewiston. And so we had to not only not use the press there, but also send to a new printer and do
Is that an added business cost?
It's a net lesser business cost because I'm not buying paper or ink or plates or have to employ
maintenance on them.
And that was an analysis on my part, looking at the likelihood of having to put big money into keeping that press going, and also still not being able to achieve the quality that I could get with this other printer. So the other printer, they have a German-made press that took 6 months to set up, and it's the same press they use at the New York Times.
Do you still have a press though?
It's still there. It's being dismantled. Really? A bit at a time. It's huge. So it's an undertaking. So, and talking about moving parts, there's additional ones that I've got going on. So with the newspaper came the building, and that's not the only property I have. I have other properties as well. So managing all those, and then I also do nonprofit consulting and training. And that's something I've had to scale way back because of how busy I am. But I have I provide training services that are paid for by the state association so that they're free or very low cost to local nonprofits, because I'm particularly interested in serving rural, smaller nonprofits with that kind of training, and they don't usually have any funds to be able to put towards that sort of thing.
How does a local nonprofit get in touch with you? Or your program, or
Yeah. So it's the Nonprofit Association of Washington is the state association, and so then they contract with me to provide trainings, and so it would be a matter of just going through their training calendar. So
and is that trainings like how to set up a proper 501c3 and keep minutes and those kinds of things? And then is there also like how to apply for grants and, is it full encompassed?
Yeah. So those resources are all available through the state association. But what I particularly specialize in is board training, and a little bit of strategic planning, but mostly board training is my favorite. And that's just working with board members on how to do their job.
And are you working with those in the Stevens Ferry County area?
All of northeastern Washington. So like I was in Ephrata in March doing a training there. I'll be down in Pullman in the fall. Like I said, I'm not doing very many right now.
Yeah.
So I've worked with, the Colville Chamber of Commerce and other entities locally. Previously, I actually worked for the state association 3/4 time as their Eastern region rep. So I formed a lot of connections that way and provided a lot of support. And then I switched to doing that on a contract basis because I just didn't have enough hours in the day. And I found that if I could cut out all the desk work and just be doing the actual serving of nonprofits, that save a lot of time.
For sure.
So far fewer meetings.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. So, and then I also have a relationship with the Innovia Foundation based out of Spokane. And they serve the 20 counties of Eastern Washington and North Idaho. And up until last fall, I was working as a very part-time regional representative for them here.
No, what is that? Can you spell Innovia?
Yeah, INNOVIA.
Okay.
So, and they are a community foundation based in Spokane. And they used to be called the Inland Northwest Community Foundation. And then they got new leadership and rebranded about 7 years ago, I think, something like that. But I've been involved with them in different ways for since 2007, I think. And I served as a grant reviewer. I'm still in their leadership committee. And they provide grants. So among other things, to a lot of nonprofits in the region. So like Woodland Theater, for example, they have their AC system because of Innovia.
Okay.
So we wouldn't be having a summer play this summer if it weren't for that, for
Cool.
example.
Yeah.
It just gets too hot. But there's numerous organizations, and then what they've done is they actually set up specific funds. So there's a Stevens County fund, so that instead of applying for the general competitive grant pool, you can apply for funds just for Stevens County.
Yeah.
And so there's, like Colville Dollars for Scholars is administered through the Innovia Foundation.
Okay.
So a lot of like local nonprofits can use them to do all the administrative duties. Which is great. And then they can handle any kind of assets. So like if you've got a farm that you don't have anyone to pass it on to, you don't want to see it just get liquidated, turned into, subdivided and that sort of thing. You can work with the Innovia Foundation to set up a leaser, a lessor who would carry on that farm and keep it in farmland.
Gotcha.
Past your death, or you can donate it and for whatever cause you're interested in supporting, and then they set up a fund that provides money each year to whatever that is in perpetuity. So they do those types of things.
Okay.
They also have a program called Launch Northwest, which is a sort of mentorship program for youth to be able to be successful once they leave high school. And that can be, a 4-year degree. It could be technical training. It could be on the job training, whatever.
Yeah.
So then they provide a promise scholarship where if you meet certain requirements, then they provide funding to make you be able to have access to things you might not otherwise be able to. So
Cool. Sounds like you're involved in a lot of good stuff.
Yeah. So that's, to give you a little bit of what they're up to.
Yeah. So what's the motivating factor for you? In the last hour and a half, getting to know you a little bit better, but it definitely seems a driving force for you is community and helping those that you're surrounded by, and in the capacity that you're able to do so. And it seems like you're not just saying that, like your actions also mirror that. And so what inspires you to do that?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I have a pat answer for that. It feels like it's just part of who I am.
Yeah. Have you spent much time with it?
Not that specific question. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely a driver. It's infused in everything I've done. If you look at my resume and all the different jobs I've had, they're largely service orientated in some way. I worked at the Tri-County Economic Development District. I've worked with WSU Extension, doing the Horizons projects in the area. I worked with the Valley School District for a number of years.
I mean, it has to be fulfilling on some level,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I think
absolutely.
that's a given.
Yeah.
If you believe it's meaningful work, there's that. I would have a hard time believing that you would do something that you don't feel is meaningful.
Yeah.
But it's something that I've tried peeling back the layers on, you know, as I get older and more introspective, you know, of like, why do we do what we do? You know, and then the really cliche, like what's the meaning of life and what is our purpose for being here? And I just have this book here by happenstance because I was reading it before you were here. I wasn't planning on interjecting it, but it's called The Great Work of Your Life.
Oh, okay.
And it talks about Dharma, you know, like in the Eastern religion and the Hindu religion, and Dharma being like your life's purpose, you know. So it talks about and I never say this right, the Bhagavad Gita. Do you know that? That's the Hindu scripture that they follow. And talking about basically your purpose in life. What is your Dharma? You know, and I think one of the examples, the author's friend is like a caretaker, and he spends some time with her, and he's like, why do you do this? You know, I walk into a house and it smells like old people, and you're changing, you know, diapers out and this and that. And he's like really peeling back the layers of, she's like, I think that's what I was meant to do. Like, that's what I'm here for. It gives me purpose. You know, it's not for financial gain and whatever. And I don't mean to sit here and like boast that we should all do things that make us feel good, because there is a financial aspect, you know, and money is part of our life. And I can make an argument that it doesn't buy happiness and it shouldn't be the motivating factor, but to wipe it off the table, I also think is ignorant, you know. But I guess the reason I ask is I'm just always fascinated and want to understand why people do what they do, and more so for the good. I'm also interested in the bad, you know, like I love documentaries and like, you know, bad stuff fascinates me as well, but just how the human mind ticks. I think maybe that was part of when I went to college. I didn't particularly like high school, as far as the actual academic side of it. I liked playing sports and hanging out with my friends, but it wasn't much for math or science or any of that. And I'd gotten some advice that said, from my counselor at school, that said, well, you should just do something that you enjoy, like study that. And I'm like, well, I don't know what that is. And so I thought about it. You know, I definitely reflected, and I was like, I enjoy talking to people and understanding why people think the way they think. And so that I just thought, well, I'll try psychology out, you know, and I actually ended up getting an internship my sophomore year, and I'm super thankful that I did that. And it was with the Center for Mental Health, which was a state-funded agency in Montana. And I had the opportunity to work with kids and also their parents that had mental health disabilities. With the kids specifically, I ran a summer program of 10 to 15 kids where I would pick them up at their house, and then they would spend 6 hours with me and one other employee, and we would do things in the community. And it was basically just a time of normalcy, you know, like we weren't doing psychoanalysis or counseling. We were going to the park and to the swimming pool and just being good examples, essentially. And then I got to do a little bit of work because I wasn't licensed or certified, but like interaction with the parents. And, you know, there was paperwork that was involved in my job. So I got to see, you know, the like the medical plans that the kids were on too, you know, treatment wise, I guess would be the right word. And I'm super thankful for that opportunity, because it really taught me that I can't do this. Like it was I had a really big problem with the system. I thought the system was flawed. You know, I had a 10-year-old kid that was on 6 different drugs that was being administered by their parents who were also on X amount of drugs. And so like, there's days where they're over medicated and under medicated. And I saw some really like hard things to see when you're 19, 20 years old, you know, and through these kids' behavior that I had no experience with. I lived a pretty good childhood. And I just realized that like, I couldn't leave it. Everyone said to have a profession in that field, you got to be able to leave it at work and not take it home with you. And I just realized I couldn't do that, you know? And so I then picked up a business degree my sophomore year and stuck with psychology, but I thought, well, business might be something to fall on, but I still really enjoy psychology, you know, of just understanding people. But I'm always curious too. It seems like I get surprised, I guess. sometimes I feel like it's far and few between that I meet people that are doing things just outside of self, that believe in the community thing. And then randomly I'll just meet people that like fly completely under the radar. And I'm like, you have a huge footprint here and no one knows all the good that you do, for no accolades or anything. And I don't even really know where I'm going with this. I'm just getting a little off the rails, but it's, just listening to you talk, it was really, I'm just wondering, like, you're in a lot of different things that seem like it's for the reason mostly to try to provide value to a community and not an individual, which I think is noble. Like, that's a good, respect that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just thinking about how in any given moment you're making choices and that perhaps in large part that's a driver for me, is that while I'm in numerous businesses that require a lot of advanced thinking and planning and strategizing and preparing and getting things ready, I also paradoxically really seek to commit to being present, whether that's for myself or for my children and family, or being at the river and just seeing the interplay of light and clouds and
how
water.
hard though is it right now to be present in today's world? Like, it's something for me, because I grew up in the technological world, like it's something I really have to do with intention. Yeah. And it's, yoga for me has helped me a ton, but like I remember the first time I meditated, sat down cross-legged, I made it like 30 seconds and I'm like, this is so dumb. And what I realized is that I couldn't sit with my thoughts. Like I couldn't not be busy or distracted. And it's taken me a long time, and I'm nowhere close to where I want to be, but I can see the value of just being present. And it sounds like such a easy term, and I don't even still feel that I understand the complexity of such a simple term. But I feel that every day now I'm trying to live more towards being in the present moment and not distracted. But I personally find that very challenging because I feel that I've been raised in and then chosen to live in a distracted world. And so it's difficult to be present.
Gotcha.
But it's worthwhile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess for me, it feels more like my natural state.
I bet. I'm just thinking about that.
And so it's like it takes effort to do all this work.
Yeah.
And intentionality. And that's where the choices come in. It's like, in this moment, what do I want to choose? And I consistently choose seeking to make the world a better place in all the spheres of influence I can.
Yeah.
And on the technological note, for us and our family, our kids don't have phones until they're driving, and we don't have TV at home. We watch Netflix and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But you were talking earlier about that, unplugged lifestyle, and in that way, I feel like that there's so much value for kids to be growing up, being kids outside. And,
and we live in such the perfect place to do it.
Yep.
Yeah.
We live in a gorgeous place. We took a giant road trip in 2019. We had 4 kids in a SUV, and we traveled 11,000 miles in 60 days around the country.
Whoa.
Yeah. And it was an amazing experience. And there's, I think we talked about gap year and those kinds of things. I think there's so much value in traveling and getting experiences. That was part of my education as a teen. I would go and spend time with different relatives and learn about their work and have those experiences.
Yeah.
I think it really enriches then how much you can appreciate what we have here.
For sure.
We've got a beautiful corner of the country. After traveling the country, we're still here.
Yeah.
And that's not by accident. It's a beautiful place. And
I didn't appreciate it till I left it.
Right.
It was all I ever knew.
Yeah.
And it definitely took me leaving to then want to come back, and then come back with intention, and I think now I've been able to just take a breath a little bit of, I see all the good here and I also see the bad. And so I can sometimes hyper focus on the bad and want to change it to good. And I think I'm now just trying to focus on that present element of this is a great place, and just do as good as you can, be a good human essentially. And whatever becomes of that is good enough, but I want to be respectful to your time because I know that I don't want to have your daughter hung out to dry. I think.
Oh, we're still good. So.
Okay.
Yep.
How much more time do you got?
8:30.
Yeah. So I don't want to I feel like I can get in the rabbit hole. So I definitely would love to have you come back. And there's still a bunch of things that I would like to talk about. I look forward to be transparent and having, if you're down with this idea, but maybe frequently coming on the podcast and just having, I feel that you and I live in two different worlds though. Mm-hmm. Like we rub elbows with two different groups of people but we're living in the same community.
Yeah.
And I would love to slowly just start conversating about that,
I'd enjoy that.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
I think there would be a lot of value in that, and so, one of my intents today was to get to know you better, to learn more about the newspaper and stuff, which I find fascinating. And I think I have more questions than I started with still. Like that's such there's a lot going on there. But I also look forward to, I think, just, if you will, shooting the shit, about what's going on in our community,
Sure.
and maybe even taking two different stances on something, but just talking it out of like, what's your perspective? What's mine? I think that that's something that isn't being done really right now, at least where it's easy to look. We're not seeing that. I know it's being done, but just where it's easy to look, we just see very polarized everything.
Yeah.
And I think there's a ton of value of sitting down at a table with your neighbor and showing respect and empathy and having conversations that need to be had though too, and talk about issues that are here. And I think you have a tool to do that through the newspaper. And I think I'm starting to sharpen a tool with this podcast, and hopefully then the end result is some kind of, community aspect to that, togetherness, if you will, to see each other. I think it's easy to take things for granted, and I think sometimes, and I speak for myself on this, but even as Americans, like we take what we have for granted, and we do have a lot. And if we focused more on the good than the bad, I think there's good to come from that, And like I said, there's still tough conversations to have, but I think there's an opportunity to maybe show others too that you can have tough conversations and not have to hate in the process, or put people in corners or, bully them into something. And I'm kind of interested. That's going to be a social experiment that I'm interested in, just to see what that comes up with.
Yeah. I applaud you in that.
Yeah.
And admire that. Interestingly, I'm thinking about my wife a few years ago started a Facebook group for that purpose. And the term she often uses is to be curious.
Okay.
And I've really admired and appreciated that.
Yeah.
For me, I'm in a tricky position in that if you read the newspaper, if I've done my job right and my crew has done their job right, you should never know how we vote or what our perspective and opinions are. Like that's, and so as a member of the community in that role, I feel like it's incumbent upon me to be really careful about maintaining that.
Yeah.
So that is a challenging aspect.
And I respect that for you individually, and I'm okay being challenged on what I'm about to say, but I think at some point we got to rip the Band-Aid off. I think that we just went too far one way of worried about offending people or not saying the wrong thing or being canceled and I feel that, even with some of my stuff of like, I don't know if I should say, and at some point I think as long as it's like good intent and it's, pure, like hopefully we can still, and I understand, I'm not talking to you personally because I understand and respect your business and the role that you have in the paper being non-biased.
Yeah.
But I am looking forward to have conversations and ripping the Band-Aid with people in the community but in the right way.
Yeah.
You know, because I just think we have built these silos that aren't working.
Mm-hmm.
And I do feel that we're missing just some basic checks and balances. You know, I think that there's value in that. And the silo effect, I think, is cancerous. And what happens when people get into silos is that everyone outside of those silos assume, and it's human nature to usually assume the worst. And then that gets into a snowball effect.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I mean by like rip the Band-Aid, not like me point at someone and say, this is what you should think, or this is how it is. But let's rip down the walls and chat, you know, and talk, because why not? You know, there's a lot of good to be done in a small community. And I think it can be done because there's good people here.
And everybody has a story.
Everyone does.
When I worked at the newspaper before as a reporter, I actually started a column called Real People. And I would just take a random name from the phone book, because we had phone books on.
Yeah.
And I would call them up.
That's awesome.
And then most of the time they would agree. And most of the time they say, well, there's nothing interesting about me. And every time I'd find something that was fascinating. And I'd just go and interview them and find that fascinating thing and write up their story.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So, and in a sense, you know, you're doing very much that.
Yeah. I'm like, I need to get a phone book.
Right? How fun would that be?
Yeah.
So yeah, I've made friends that I still talk to today through that, and I have memories, you know, like there was this elderly gentleman who, you know, genuinely we were struggling to find, you know, turned out he'd driven 1 million miles. He was a trucker.
Wow.
Yeah. Like he was part of the 1 Million Mile Club. How amazing is that?
Yeah. And I think that's something that I'm really excited for about this, is that just kind of by design, I make pretty much the same 3 moves every day.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it gets a little bit of the Groundhog's Day effect. See the same people, go to the same places.
Yep.
And so I'm really excited to kind of broaden that a little bit and get to know more of the people in the community, because the stories are so fascinating. And I'm just starting to see it snowball. Like I've got, of the people that listen to every episode, like I can already tell they're faithful, right? Like they like what they're hearing. They believe, you know, in the brand or whatever, if you will. And then they're telling other people. And like, I've had a lot of good people recommended to me that then I've reached out to through other people, you know, and like, I'm starting to just see the spider web effect. And I'm like, this is going to be cool. I'm going to meet all sorts of new people, and then also have people on that I've known that I didn't know, you know, like on just what you and I just did here, you know, like been in the same community for 30 years, but didn't really know anything about each other, you know, like I'm excited for that.
Very cool.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming in. To our listeners, please check out The Statesman. If you haven't checked it out in the last year, it's worth doing. I speak a lot through the sports lens. You know, if you have kids in high school sports or really any activity, they're taking great photos. They're publishing all of the schools in this area. It's very well covered and balanced, in my opinion. The interns that you have are fascinating to read. If you can, show them support by buying the paper, leaving a positive comment on the Facebook page or something, you know.
Which we just launched a new Facebook page.
Okay.
Yep.
So check that out on Facebook. North Columbia Monthly is about anywhere that you go. You can find a copy of that in the Tri-County area. Yeah, man, like I said, thank you so much. I look forward to having you back, and really appreciate the work you're doing.
You too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.